the review of the Trek Marlin 7. Let's do this.
When you get over the magnificent color scheme and the immaculate looks, you begin to see the Trek Marlin 7 for what it is. An inexpensive yet impressive hardtail mountain bike. For the low price of Rs 69,000, the 2021 iteration of the Trek Marlin 7 offers some major upgrades over its predecessors from 2020. Take a ride with me as we dive deep into the specifications of this bike and learn about what I like and dislike about this bike, as well as talk a bit about my ride experience with this bike after having completed 1,000 kilometers on it. If you're new to the channel, consider liking, subscribing and dropping a comment on how I can improve my YouTube content. The frame of the Trek Marlin 7 is made of 6061 grade hydroformed aluminum, or as Trek likes to call it, alpha silver aluminum. 6061 is a grade of aluminum alloy known for its medium to high strength. Hydroforming refers to a technique where standard cylindrical shaped aluminum tubes are put into a mold and exposed to highly pressurized liquid to expand them to take up irregular mold shapes, which may add to the structural integrity of the frame without the need to use extra material, which would otherwise attract a weight penalty. The geometry of the frame is very cross-country oriented, which gives the feeling that a lot of thought was put into the frame geometry of the bike. However, this attention to detail does not translate into the dropper post routing of the frame. There is no hole at the base of the seat tube should you want to install an internal dropper post to the frame. Drilling a hole in the seat tube only serves to void your warranty. Clearly, Trek didn't think this one through. Another problem with the frame is that the seat tube mount for a bottle cage does not allow for a standard sized bottle to fit the inner triangle on my size large. The steerer tube isn't tapered and neither are the frame tubings butted. Butting refers to variable thickness in the walls of the aluminum tubing to reduce the weight without sacrificing the integrity of the frame. However, it is not all bad news for the Trek Marlin 7's frame. The frame has provisions for internal cable routing for brakes and two derailleurs, as well as a partially integrated routing for a dropper post. In addition to this, the frame also has provisions for two bottle cages, a pannier rack and an integrated direct mount kickstand. At this price point, the frame is more than satisfactory, but a provision for a fully integrated dropper post is sorely missed. The fork on this bike is courtesy of RockShox, and it is their RockShox Judy coil fork. It is a sturdy coil spring fork that provides excellent dampening for its price. It has 32 mm stanchions with 46 mm offset and 100 mm of travel in most sizes. The fork comes with a preload adjustment knob as well as a turnkey lockout knob. While the former allows you to set the plushness of the fork as per your comfort, the latter allows you to lock the fork from compressing altogether in exchange for a gain in pedaling efficiency. This year's suspension fork is a massive upgrade from last year's RockShox XC30. The RockShox Judy coil fork is a welcome addition to this year's iteration of the Marlin 7. The Marlin 7 in 2021 and 2022 can come in either Bontrager connection rims or Bontrager's Covey TLR rims. I wasn't fortunate enough to get the Bontrager's tubeless ready Covey rims, but in my experience, the Bontrager connection rims have been satisfactory. The 21mm rim width isn't impressive, but it isn't too bad either. On the plus side, the Formula DC hubs that come as a part of this wheel set are laced with 32 spokes. As a result, the bicycle rims are plenty strong and stayed true throughout the testing period. The hubs themselves are pretty basic. They use simple cup and cone bearings and have provisions for a 6-bolt rotor. There is no Shimano center locking or sealed hubs to be seen here, but at this price, that is to be expected. The rear free hub sounds rather quiet, which I prefer due to it having only 56 points of engagement. For fans of loud free hubs, this will surely be disappointing to hear, but I personally enjoy a quieter free hub quite a bit more than the noisier ones. Here is a sample of the free hub sound. A group set refers to those parts which are directly responsible for moving and stopping the bike. Trek Marlin 7 features a mostly Shimano Dior level group set this year, only deviating ever so slightly for the brake set, cranks, and the bottom bracket. This year's Marlin 7 makes a massive jump to the Shimano Dior group set from the Shimano Acera used in the Marlin 7 of 2020. The drivetrain of the bike consists of a 1x10 transmission with a front crank coming from FSA's Alpha Drive lineup. This is paired with a 28-teeth Megatooth chainring, also from FSA. Trek clearly saved some money on the front end of the drivetrain by skimping out on a Shimano Dior crankset and a Holotech 2 bottom bracket. The square taper FSA bottom bracket that comes with this bike is an older standard. It would have been nice to see a Holotech 2 bottom bracket, especially since its competition such as the Giant Talon 1 or the Scott Aspect 930 managed to pull it off at such a low price point. However, it is not all bad news for the drivetrain, as the rear end of the drivetrain uses a Shimano Dior 11 to 46 teeth 10-speed cassette from its M4100 lineup. This is paired with an 11-speed Shimano Dior M5120 long cage clutched derailleur. The transmission is operated by a Shimano M4100 shifter without an optical gear display, located on the right end of the handlebar. The clutch on the rear derailleur maintains sufficient chain tension and reduces chain slap. It also eliminates almost all possibility of the chain falling off. The shift quality of the bike is crisp, fast, and precise. The drivetrain of this bike is clearly the MSP this year, especially when you take into account how little it costs. The brake set on this bike is Shimano's MT200 hydraulic disc brakes. These brakes hail from Shimano's Altus line of group sets. These are paired with Shimano's RT26 6-bolt disc rotors, which are 160mm for most sizes, but on frame sizes L and XL, Trek throws in a 180mm rotor on the front. These brakes perform well for the price and I have no complaints from the brakes. The brakes offer sufficient modulation and provide ample stopping power in all weather conditions. It would have been great to see Shimano Dior MT410 brake set to match with the Dior drivetrain, but the MT200s that come with this bike are standard affair brake sets among all bikes at this price point. Don't let my wish for Shimano Dior brakes undermine the performance of the MT200s that come with this bike. The brakes on this bike are absolutely fantastic. The finishing kit on this bike comes from Trek's sister company Bontrager. Bontrager is responsible for the handlebar, stem, seat post, saddle, wheel set, grips, and tires of the Marlin 7. The handlebar on this bike is a Bontrager alloy 720mm handlebar. 31.2mm thickness ensures structural rigidity, while its 720mm width gives confidence while handling. The 5mm rise to this handlebar adds to the overall comfortable position of the bike. The stem on this size large Marlin 7 is a Bontrager alloy stem, which is 80mm in length, but the length varies according to the frame size of your choice. The stem is blender compatible. Blender technology allows the user to add accessories directly onto the stem, using blender mounts for a cleaner look. The grips on the handlebar are Trek's Trail Comp nylon lock-on grips. This is an upgrade from the cheaper grips found on the Marlin 4, 5 and 6 and are plenty grippy enough to inspire confidence even while riding without gloves. The seat post is also Bontrager alloy with a thickness of 31.8 mm to give it extra strength and is 400 mm long for most sizes. Bottle cage bolts on the seat post may prevent the seat post from lowering beyond a certain point. If it affects you as a user, it is best to saw a portion of the seat post off to meet your desired length. The saddle on this bike is a Bontrager's Arvada saddle. The saddle looks sleek and sexy and matches the overall look of the bike. The saddle is a bit on the firm side, but I personally prefer a firm saddle. However, it is really important to note that saddles are a very personal choice, and so your mileage with the Bontrager Arvada saddle may vary. The tires on this bike are Bontrager's XR2 Comp. These tires are essentially rebranded tires, initially made by Kenda. The tires aren't tubeless compatible and have a thin sidewall. The tires are 29 by 2.2 in size for both wheels of my Marlin 7. The tread pattern of the tires isn't very aggressive, and while they maintain decent grip on gravelly conditions when dry, I have already had a wipeout on this bike when cornering on wet tarmac. The tires are one of the first upgrades I would suggest for this bike.
So now let's talk about what I like and what I don't like about this bike. The first thing that I like about this bike is its off-roading capability. The bike performs exceptionally well off-roads. On the roads, this bike is fairly boring to ride. It's not very exciting, I would say, on the roads because most of the gears are actually optimized for climbing on this bike. On road, you don't really need such climbing prowess most of the time. But the moment you take it off-road, the surface becomes uneven. That's when some of these easier gears really come into action. The bike handles very well. The handlebars wideness adds to the confidence while handling. In most dry gravel conditions, the tires actually hold up really well. The suspension is really plush. Overall, this makes up for a very good off-roading machine for the price. The second thing that I really like about this bike is the attention to detail that Trek has put in here. Attention to detail refers to things that are not going to be on the spec sheet of the bike, and maybe as a customer you may not even look at these things, but when you finally get your bike and you look at it, that's when you understand that Trek has put in these little touches to make your life easier. The hubs on this bike, for example, are Formula DC hubs. Now the thing about these hubs is that they are simple cup and cone bearings. But Trek has actually put in rubber stoppers here to prevent dust and other things from getting in between the bearings through the cup and cones. This is something that is not usually seen on other bicycles. And this is not something that a customer even notices while making a purchase decision. But regardless, it's there so that maintenance intervals can be maximized. I really like this about Trek. They have done this across their entire range. Whether you buy a very inexpensive cycle from Trek or whether you buy some 10 lakh rupees super caliber, it's there. And they tend to really think about the bikes they make regardless of the price point. The third thing that I really like about this bike is the smooth riding quality of the bike. The bike is incredibly smooth, the drivetrain is noiseless, shifting is perfect. I, throughout my testing period, have not had any problems with this bike. I haven't even had a puncture. So I think that this bike rides really well for the price. I would say a few road bikes would ride better on tarmac, but as far as off-roading is concerned, this is one of the best value options. The fourth thing that I like about this bike is reliability. As I mentioned in my previous statement, reliability is huge on this bike. I have not run into a single issue. Shifting has been perfect, suspensions have been perfect, I haven't had a puncture, my disc brakes have stayed aligned, my derailleur for the most part has performed very well. The seat, no loose bolts, which is very common with bikes when you start with new bikes when you start riding them. I have had absolutely no issues with this bike. So I think it's super reliable. This is something that you can trust when you're making really long distance rides. Overall, that's another plus point for the Trek Marlin 7. The fifth thing that I really like about this bike is that it's very lightweight for its price. Now 13 kilograms may not seem like very light to you, but considering that it only costs 68 to 70,000 for an alloy bike, I think this is plenty good. Also, one more thing that we all need to remember is that 13 kilograms may sound like a lot on paper, but it's inconsequential when it is compared to your own weight. What matters is how the bike feels when you're climbing on it. And for a 13 kilogram bike, this really doesn't feel like a 13 kilogram bike. The last thing that I really like about this bike is the quality of the paint job. The paint job does not scratch or scuff. It is a matte paint job, which means it's more susceptible to scratches. But even then, I haven't had any problems with the paint job. The quality of paint job on this bike is truly stunning. So let's now talk about things that I don't like about the bike. So the first thing that I do not like about this bike is this 28 tooth chain ring. This is a really tiny chain ring, to be honest. And while this really helps when climbing, this doesn't help with the speed on the road. And 28 teeth is really tiny. They should have at least gone for 30 or 32. If you really want to ride on roads, the only options you have are the 8th, 9th and the 10th gears on this bike. Anything other than that and you're sure to spin out. The next thing that I don't like about this bike is the BCD of the crank. So you might ask, what is a BCD? BCD refers to the bolts that are holding the chainring in place with the crank. There are various different standards. Shimano uses 104. Some I think use 92 or 94. I'm not really sure which. And finding chain rings for those cranks is much easier. This one is an 82 BCD crank. I searched far and wide and I could not find a spare chain ring for this crank set. So if this chain ring ever wears out, you're better off buying a whole new crank rather than just replacing the chain ring, because you're not going to be able to find the 82 BCD chain ring that easily. The third thing that I do not like about this bike is that due to the small chain ring in the front, the cassette is going to wear out fast if you're trying to go fast on this bike. Because when you want to go fast, you have to use these lower gears on the bike. When you're using these lower gears on the bike, you have less number of teeth at the back. Say 28 and 13 or 15 or 11. So when you have less number of teeth at the back, each tooth takes more strain and that eats into your cassette much faster. So not only is this cassette not cheap to replace, you will need to replace it more often, because if you want to go fast, you're going to be using less number of teeth at the back, and that's going to lead to accelerated wearing of the cassette. And that is one big con that I see with the bike. This could be alleviated by simply putting a larger chain ring at the front, so that way the gears that you use shift slightly to bigger sprockets. But as long as you don't do that, this is going to be a very difficult thing to keep replacing. Your chain is also as a result going to need frequent replacing, because it's bending a lot because you are using very small sprockets to get speed. The next thing that I don't like about this bike is that it spins out on descents. Anytime you have a really steep descent, even on the 10th gear, you'll find yourself spinning out. You're pedaling too fast, your pedaling is not having any effect on adding to the speed of the bike. This is just not a great solution. I mean, we don't have enough low gears on this bike, and that is a problem. The lowest gear I have here is a 11 tooth in the back and a 28 tooth in the front. This roughly makes for a gear ratio of somewhere between 2.7 and 2.8. To put that into perspective, my single speed B-twin, which has a 44 to 18 tooth or 42 to 18 tooth, has a gear ratio of somewhere between 2.4 and 2.5. For the highest gear of a bicycle to be 2.8, I think that's really bad. That's just marginally better than my B-twin, my bike. The next thing that I don't like about this bike was that there was no grease in the clutch. When I got this bike, the clutch was very clicky, and when you turn off the clutch it would work fine, but the moment the clutch was turned on, this was very clicky. This is supposed to move freely. There's supposed to be tension, but this is still supposed to move freely. So I opened the 2mm Allen bolts that are holding this cap, and then I looked at the clutch. The clutch ring did not have any grease in it. Now the whole system is not supposed to have grease, just the clutch ring, but even the clutch ring did not have grease, and the lack of grease was what was making this whole system very clicky. Now I understand this is not Trek's fault. This could be a problem with Shimano, but when you're paying 70 grand for a bike, you expect perfection, right? And not having grease and me having to do this myself is not a very good look for the bike. The last thing that I don't like about this bike is that there is no proper mount for a derailleur cage. This is actually made for pannier racks, which will go like this, and there's no actual proper mount for a derailleur cage. Now if this was Shimano Tourney and if I fell on the drivetrain side and I had to replace the derailleur, it would cost me somewhere between $750 to $1,000. On the Dior, this is much more expensive of a replacement, not to mention that finding a Dior rear derailleur right now in COVID times is very difficult. So there should have been some kind of protection to protect my investment, especially since Shimano Dior is not exactly a very inexpensive derailleur, but it's not there. So you have to be really careful that your bike does not fall or you do not crash on the drive side, because otherwise this is going to really set you back a lot of money. So I hope you enjoyed my content. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment on the video. I'll see you on the next one.